And I met her recently, and she was saying the things she says in French, these are things she couldn't write in the Malagasy language. And she says, for example, if she's sitting with her brother, and if she wouldn't be able to talk about sex, openly with words that are quite clear and free in the Malagasy language. So maybe it's a liberation also to write in another language, and very often writers who can write in different languages feel that.
I think the example is also what you cited is shared by some writers from Maghreb as well, who have Arabic and French as both the languages at their disposition, and who do find French liberating. So I mean, I suppose it works in different ways. Ananda, most of the time you have been identified as a Mauritian writer, right? Now, I don't mean just your identity as a person, but as a writer. How do you respond to that? And because you did start writing about Mauritian characters, or about the flora, the fauna in Mauritius. So Mauritius was really a backdrop for many of your works.
Yeah.
So how do you look at it today? Because there has been a shift as well in your writing. So would you like to elaborate on that?
Yeah, I think that Mauritius is still at the root, even when it's not sort of ostensibly set in Mauritius, it's still there somewhere, because it's the root of my writing. I mean, when I started writing seriously in adolescence, the inspiration came almost directly from the island itself, because in adolescence it's a kind of transitory phase. You're a bit in a sort of mystical set of mind, and I had this sort of very, very strong, powerful link to the island, to nature, also to the people, to what I was getting from it was really the source of my inspiration, and still is. But all writers, in a way, have to be grounded somewhere. You have to be rooted somewhere, but from there you sort of enlarge and try to reach something or touch something that goes beyond that little place. Even Faulkner wrote it from his small, county or town. Many writers always write about their small place, but then they always try to break the limits of that small place and say something about others, or about themselves, about humanity. So for me, there's a difference between my writing being based in Mauritius and a Mauritian identity. So in fact, I've had, I think maybe I have a record in the number of labels that have been sort of, attached to me as a writer. So, well, first of all, there was Mauritian writer, then there was Indo-Mauritian writer, then there was Africano-Indiano Mauritian writer, Franco-Indian I've had, Franco-Mauritian. Francophone. So it's sort of a label that keeps growing more and more. And in fact, if you ask any writer, they're just going to say, "Well, I'm a writer," and that's it. You don't want to actually be, sort of be bounded by any kind of label, and it's complicated, because of course you're writing as yourself, so you have these identities. I'm not saying that these are not part of me, but what comes out should not have any labels. It should be able to touch somebody from India, or somebody from France, or somebody from anywhere else in the world. And I think that the need to categorize writers according to their nationality or region or whatever is more sort of to do with maybe publishers finding the place to put you in, and from which to publicize your work. Booksellers also need to, they always do that. They put literature from such a country, from this country or that country. So it's more to do with mechanics, perhaps, of publishing and book selling, marketing also, obviously, yeah. But it can be very, very restrictive when people, or especially critics or journalists, read your work only from that prism, and then try to see something like sort of an anthropological study of Mauritius, for example, in a book, whereas I'm writing fiction. It's not anthropology. And this can go to some extreme. For example, when Pugly was published, and there's a scene which is completely sort of in a kind of dream or sort of, non-realistic setting, when the women come because she's having this adulterous affair, and they brand her with the name of Pugly on her forehead. And it's obviously, when you read the book, it's not a realistic scene. And a journalist asked me whether women were branded in Mauritius, you know? So it sort of, it almost sort of made me feel next time I'll set the story in a completely imaginary place, and nobody will tell me, well, do they do this in Mauritius? But, you can't help it in a way to be categorized in that way.
But the choice of Pugly as a title, the fact that you kept that, and Gallimard sort of, kept it as well. What was the reaction in France or in, elsewhere? Because in India, I mean, it's natural. You hear Pugly and you know what that means.
I know.
Did
Actually,
it sound Italian to some people, or any other
it
language?
did sound Italian, and some pronounced it a bit in the Italian way. And this is, just to tell you about the problems of translation. When I chose that title in French, I wanted it to sound strange. Obviously, they wouldn't know what it was about until they read it and understood it. So it changed from the kind of exotic or exoticizing writing that was happening in the sort of earlier, sort of 20, 30, 40 years ago, where those writing from the margins needed to explain everything because they were writing for a reader from the center, So whereas this has changed very much with sort of, with time, with new generations of writers, where now they say, no, we're writing from our place, so you reader have to make the journey back towards us. And in Pugly, most of all the titles are in French and Creole, and there are some dialogue in Creole without translation. So in a way, I'm telling the French also that the Mauritian Creole is 90% based on French words. So in a way, if you read it aloud, at some point you have to make the step to try to understand what it is, because it's part of your history as well. But so there was this whole sort of, I don't like the word strategy, but significance in using that Hindi word as a title for a novel in French. But when I was translating it and it was going to be published in India, and I thought, my God, this is like the worst cliche you can think about in Hindi. Somebody looks at a novel and it's called Pugly. It's like sort of entitling a novel the Mad Woman, or the Mad Woman in the Attic, or something like that. So I really had a hard thought about it and thinking, can I recreate something like that which has a notion of strangeness? And then I thought, well, no, why should I? It will have a different significance, but the Indian reader will come at it in a different way, maybe understanding the title, but then going into Mauritius, thinking, well, where are they? Are they Indians, aren't they? So there was a strangeness there also. But just to tell you with one word how much this can change meaning from one place and one language to another.
Absolutely. Ananda, I'd like to bring back to this. You mentioned in an interview that the Mauritius that you portray is not the paradise, or the kind of the idyllic place as is sold for tourism, and you present the other side of Mauritius. And we all know that the other side of Mauritius that you talk about in your novels is the dark side, also where the characters wear the burden of the Indian identity, So we find that is a recurrent theme in many of the novels, or at least of the first cycle. And so my question would be that, would it be possible to write about I'm using the term Indo-Mauritian because again it's very complicated. Diaspora is extremely problematic to me, because I feel that 4 generations of people who lived in another country can't be called the Indian diaspora. They are Mauritians in their own right. Exactly. So that's problematic. And to talk of Indo-Mauritians, maybe, at one level, then maybe that's a better term. So my question is it possible to speak about an Indo-Mauritian character or a family without falling into this trap of this burden of tradition? Because I find that that is something that weighs a lot in most of the works, whether it's Wal the Draupadi, whether it is La Fouet, or whether it is in Pagli, or even for that matter in Moi l'Interdite.
Yeah, again, yes, the Paradise Island is as much of a myth as everything else that that the Mauritian sort of government promotes tourism, and obviously they have to promote the image of this idyllic tropical island where everybody lives together. It's sort of a small world, a microcosm of the world in miniature, but in reality, when you just delve a little bit, you scratch the surface, you know that it's not like that. There's a lot of tension, and what really sort of makes me sometimes feel aghast when I look at Mauritian society is that after 300 years. These components of society have been living together in that small island, which is sort of 2,000 square kilometers, large or small, and they're still categorizing themselves through this ancestral identity. Now, I'm not saying that you have to lose it, because I wear the sari. I feel very proud of that component of my identity. But I also know that in my writing, I'm very close also to the writers from the African continent, of course, from the French, tradition of writing. So all this does make up Mauritian identity. So why always sort of try to limit yourself to one specific identity? And it's to such an extent that even today the caste system, although it's not a system there anymore, it's just a how would I call it? A kind of way of categorizing people again, but it still has a function in politics. And of course, politics, the purpose of politics or politicians is almost to divide people, because that's how they get votes. So, it's them, us. And this them, us, and the other is so entrenched in the way people think that when I go back home and I talk about it, people now tell me, well, you don't live here anymore. As if I don't have, I'm almost I've lost touch, but I haven't, because I go there every year, I read the papers, I constantly talk to people there. And it's not true that, I do see this entrenchment behind these barriers. And it's something that I'm trying to, in the novels, to push as far as possible. And it's true that a lot of them are about that Indian sort of community of Indian origin, but in Soupir it's also about the Creole, the descendants of the Africans on a small island. And it's like sort of trying to resolve this past. Because in fact, when people left, not the slaves, they had to leave because they were forced, but the Indians who left India they were not just pulled by some promises of a sort of an El Dorado in front of them. They were also pushed by the circumstances of their life here. The people the peasants from Bihar were dying of hunger, of famine. So they had to go to try to survive. So when they arrived in this small island, instead of looking towards the future, they were in fact looking towards the past. And even today, they still do. So, so what I'm trying to say is sort of, for example, this idea of these women branding Pagli because she's had this, not only an adulterous affair, but with somebody who is of African origin, a Creole, and they absolutely forbid her to have this passionate love with this man. So, and they tell her, I call them the muffin, because this is a Creole word, which means the bearer of ill luck, of misfortune, and the sort of cursed sort of creatures, and they're all dressed in white like widows, and they tell her, you are a woman, you have to bear the responsibility of the purity of our race or our ancestry. But of course, there's no pure race. I mean, this is again another myth. So this is why I try to break so as much as possible these myths apart.
The thematic of women is very present. Of course, there are other books, but by and large, in your books, the thematic of woman, the body. This is something again that you spoke about, but is also there very obvious in your works, is that the body of the woman should belong to her, whereas you see that it does not. And you see a certain marginalization. There is the woman who is seen as a victim, as the oppressed. At the same time, but the body is also the site of desire, and not just a desire as an object, but also as a subject that you see also in your works, right? Yeah. So how do you reconcile between these two, positions, the woman as the object who is completely, oppressed, and the site of desire, which is there, in the book. So how did you reconcile, and, how do you sort of, when you're working with your characters, how do you come out of...
Well, these are actually the 2 points, the starting point and the end point, is that at the start they are in that sort of subservient position of being the object and being sort of bound by all these rules that society creates about everybody, but mostly about women. I mean, more specifically about women. And I am interested in marginals, in those who don't belong, who don't sort of follow the straight and narrow path, who try to go outside it, and whom society tries to compel to come back to that path. But within the marginals, generally the women and children probably are the most marginalized in context of conflicts, of war, who are the ones who suffer most. Or the men also suffer, but the women are the ones who are raped, who are subjected to incredible exactions and cruelty, and which is still there today in spite of all the development, all the change. It's still there today in South Africa, where in India rape is becoming much more of a talked about subjects, whereas it's been there all the time. So the starting point is with this woman who in her mind is out of the track, but who is being forced to follow, to come back to the track or to follow it. And the end point will be when she'll have regained herself. And it generally comes through regaining possession of her body. Because the first thing that women are perhaps dispossessed of is their body, or the choice to do what they like with it. The rules, and this is very, very strange that in most religions you have rules about women when they are menstruating or when they've just had a baby, that they can't go to the temple, that they are in a kind of polluting type of situation. You have it in Hinduism, you have it in Islam, in the Jewish Judaism. So, and I always wonder, why is something which is a physical, organic process considered to be a pollution, considered to be impure? And to me, it seems that because religion was mostly, sort of religious rules were mostly written by men, that this is a mystery, an enigma of women. All this part about childbearing is something that men will never be able to touch, won't understand. You know, however much they will try to understand, they can't imagine what it is to be, to bear a child, to have a child inside. And so this kind of mystery makes them dangerous. I mean, this has been said before, I'm not but it makes them like witches or magical beings. So these are beings, and witches, you have to sort of hold them back from their witchcraft, if you like. So in a way, all these rules tend to sort of prevent them from having this freedom to have a child with someone else, or not to have a child, or to give themselves to a man or a woman, or whatever they want to do, but it's their choice. So even today in society, the way, let's talk in Western societies where women are more liberated, but the image that is sent to all women, and especially young girls in magazines, on the television and all that, is a very objectifying image. So we can't even say that that the women have control of their body. So this is something, and in my sort of stories and work, they are alone in this fight. So there's no God to help them. There's no one else. They have to do that way and that sort of travel that path alone until they find the, the door, the opening.
But what I found particularly interesting is, for example,
The husband anymore, and she when she does the walk on fire at the end, it's because she decides. It's not because that's the moment, the trigger, because throughout the novel she's thinking, will I do it? Won't I do it? Because she has a child who's very, very ill, and who's dying, in fact, of meningitis, and her husband and mother-in-law tell her to do the walk on fire as a kind of sacrifice to sort of, in a way, save the life of the child. So, and she doesn't believe in it. She doesn't believe in this sort of self-mortification. And the dilemma is that if she follows her own belief and doesn't do the walk on fire and her child dies, she might think she hasn't tried everything to save him. But if